Okay, first example, Cushman Wakefield, an organization that's across North America. And, we're starting to think about our malls as different places. Used to be that, the main objective of a developer was to understand what retailers would benefit from being in the store. But we know now that malls are becoming more central to communities, and that because of the nature of online and offline shopping, that we really need to think about the mall as an entity. So the ability, for example, to understand the size and shape of a trade area was never really an issue for a developer. It was, the size and shape for this retailer versus that one. But now malls are looking at improving their competitiveness by making sure that the mall as an entity is a part of what's being marketed. And we use mobile movement data. It's kind of the exciting new thing that's happening in the geography world. I'm going to talk about that a little bit more later. But we use mobile movement data to help a developer understand who's coming to the mall. They don't have customer data in the same way as retailers do, but they need to know in general who they serve. And then when we look at the mobile movement data, we can actually tie the movement of cell phones, all anonymous and privacy compliant, and GDPR and other privacy regulation compliant. We can tie it back into more traditional demographics, and then we can link it to media behavior so that we can actually end up helping a mall understand who's coming, what the different segments of the population are that are their best potential customers, and how you can really reach them in a more meaningful way through your marketing programs. Having a little trouble moving my slides quickly. I don't know why. So the results of putting that information together was not only were they able to band together the groups of retailers in their stores to attract a better mall mix, but to start to think about events that would attract sponsors and bring shoppers into the facility. As a result, in one short campaign, they increased their engagement by 40%. It's very hard when we do work for customers to actually give us the raw numbers about the results, but I'm delighted to say that with many of our customers, we do a test and learn kind of program where we say, okay, we did this work and we launched this campaign. Did it really make a difference? The next one I'm going to talk about is General Motors. Now, many manufacturers have to really look at their brand and understand their customers, but then they have to be able to execute locally. In this case, similar kind of thing, they wanted to understand the different subsets of their customer population. Now, they do have customer data. They have the registrations of who bought their products. And we were able to work with them to identify 7 different types of customers. You can imagine, you look at socioeconomic status, you look at the age groups, and then you also look at the motivators around people to buy cars. So the more you can define the distinctions and the differences, then the better you can reach people. Because the data are also linked to a wide variety of other important databases, after we look at who actually buys their cars, can develop a persona. And the mantra is, you want to get the right message to the right people using the right medium in a way that the consumer wants to be marketed to. And that's exactly what we were able to do for them, so that they can go from a broad range of who buys this particular Chevrolet line, look at which dealerships have the best potential to sell, and actually get the right message to the right consumer based on who lives in the trade area, as well as who's more likely to buy the product. And again, great results for getting people into the dealership. A downtown BIA, a business improvement area, which would be like a retail strip that is supported by the municipality, looking to how they can really band together. Getting small businesses to be able to afford research is a big challenge. So we try to work with them in groups of communities, as it happens in many places in the US as well. And they wanted to understand during COVID the impacts of the people shopping in their location pre and post pandemic. So once again, we turn to the mobile movement data, but they didn't have the capacity to look at, pings from cell phones from one of the mobile movement providers. So we built the data into an automated template that allowed them to create visualizations and monthly see whether their traffic was going up or down based on where they were in terms of regulations, lockdowns. and put the data at their fingertips so that they could actually go and help their BIA participants understand how to change in how to make sudden changes in responses to when people were leaving their homes. And they've now put this into an ongoing monitoring system so that they can see not only when people are coming back to shopping, but what is the effect of campaigns and what's happening now between the mix of shopping in store and online. Nobody believes the mythology that's out there that nobody's ever going to go in a store again. But it does mean that people who run businesses and small businesses have to be able to understand consumer behavior, both online and offline. And these kinds of tools where you can integrate data together help people get that omni-channel mix. Similar for a high-end Canadian clothing brand called Harry Rosen. We see some of the management of our big basketball teams and other really sharp dressers in these kind of stores in downtown Toronto. But they don't really have a good database of their customers. They wanted to understand who comes into their store and where they have the opportunity to upsell. They also wanted to get away from, really the older generation and figure out how to appeal to a different set of customers. So once again, we relied on segmentation, but then we turned around and we helped them execute campaigns in neighborhoods where there was people who would have a propensity to really shop for those kinds of clothes. They also used the segmentation to understand that everybody isn't going to wear a suit anymore and we need to have kind of upscale leisure clothes. And then they translated all of this research into campaigns, not only direct mail and online, but in actually bus shelters and downtown digital out-of-home advertising opportunities. They got a 16% lift last year from this kind of campaign by using this kind of very micro-targeting. So understanding from their customer base what the potential was and then understanding how to execute. Another example, tourism. Who is going to travel to New Brunswick for a vacation? Both from Canada and the United States. Here we use the mobile movement data again, but we were able to link back where the visitor came from. And then we were able to go and look at research for different states in the US and see, if you're going to promote people to come to Atlantic Canada for holiday, then we could use mobile movement data to link into US segmentation and demographic behavior so that they could really target campaigns precisely around people who were likely to respond to the experience that you could have in New Brunswick. And they used this to understand also the differences between Canadians and Americans so they could tailor their TV advertising to different kinds of consumers. Another example that people might not think of is the Winnipeg Jets sports team. There's a lot of talk about sports analytics, but there's also a lot of great work being done in fan analytics. So helping an organization understand how to take the fan base that they already have for NHL hockey and then translate it into a more affordable American League hockey series, and really how to upsell, or I guess in this way downsell people to fill the stadium based on who's likely to come and what kinds of things that they are kind of have an affinity with. Because there's a lot of sponsorships that are being sold inside a hockey or a sports arena. We saw that on the weekend. And so the opportunity to really look at the profile of their existing season ticket holders and understand how to target that next generation that might not be able to afford season's ticket for an NHL team, but find out how to get them to move up the ladder by going to a junior team game or going to smaller ticket packages and actually coming out to seeing their ticket sales. They saw improved response rates, and they also saw stickiness from the campaigns because they were using the information to really reach out to the fans that had different kinds of motivations. I think this is my last example, but when Walmart in Canada, they were a little bit behind schedule, but they certainly really wanted to understand grocery delivery. And they don't have a customer database, so they really needed to turn to us for information. And they were really trying to understand from which locations should we launch a trial for our food delivery. And, you know, it's very expensive to set up any kind of a test and learn program. And as much as, you know, researchers say, well, you know, you just, you know, A/B it, or you set up this variable, every campaign, you know, you have to have test and control, but you also have to have it be something that actually at least pays a return on what they invest in the research. So this was an opportunity to link traditional segmentation to transactional data that they had from a small experiment on order online and come and pick up your groceries. And we were able to develop a model that could identify the drivers of behavior. And then we were able to go and pick the stores for the test that actually had a preponderance of people in that demographic. So that with a small test of a test of a number of stores, they were able to identify the places where the offer would be more successful. And once again, it had a 40% lift. So I'm going to just skip to the question. Well, this is all very interesting. It's sort of a lot of market research, a lot of data coming together, understanding the objectives that for a brand or a marketer. But really, what does it have to do with GIS? And essentially, from my point of view, it has everything, because whether you're thinking about brand, whether you're thinking about messaging, whether you're thinking about custom audiences, whether you're deploying messages through advertising, or you're looking at your shelf display, geography is the great integrator behind these success stories. And when we do a lot of work in Canada, we work with many universities, and we teach a lot, and we provide data into labs. But it's amazing to me, and we were talking about this earlier on the call, the extent to which the business schools and the IT departments, and even the math and the analytics departments, don't always understand the crucial role that geography plays in building these kinds of data and analytics. So I'm going to tell you just a little bit about what we do and how it all comes together. And then hopefully when we get to the discussion part, we can answer more questions. But there's tons of information out there, but it's so hard for an analyst or a program manager, a person who's actually got a mandate to execute a marketing campaign or pick a location or plan a media buy. They can't possibly go out and harness all the data. So in Canada, you can see that we use 85 different sources. We believe that data and analytics is a partnership game. So we take data from all of the organizations, survey companies, aggregators of data, people who specialize in location data, public and private sector. And we consider it our job to bring all that data into an ecosystem. And then we have a team of, you know, scientists and data development people who use, you know, modeling techniques, microsimulation, you know, nearest neighbor kind of clustering, benchmarking. We build, you know, sort of models that are sort of operations research type models, where if you have data at the say the county level, but you want to project it right down to the neighborhood or the postal area, then you bring the data in at the level that you have it, and you try various techniques to model it down, and then you use control totals to make sure that you're actually adding up to the things that people would expect. We're not so much about creating new data for Canada and the provinces. We're about taking data that exists that are really great data sources and making sure that people can put the learning into action. And what that means is driving it down to a way that it can be used in a spatial framework. So we end up using all those different kinds of techniques. We create demographics and segments and psychographics and behavior and financial analysis and mobile movement data, 50,000 variables for each one of the 750,000 postal codes. And the secret sauce is that whatever modeling technique you use, or whatever data input source, at the end of the day, you reference everything to where it happened. And we try to make it happen. We try to reference it to the smallest area possible. You know, there was always this debate about, well, I need real data about individuals. And in Canada, we've been in a privacy framework much longer than in the US. There are organizations that know, the name and address and how much money you spent on groceries. But that's becoming much more difficult. But what's really, really good surrogate still, after all these years, after 45 years, if I know your zip +4 or your 6-digit postal code, I can tell you a lot of things about you. And I do it in a totally privacy compliant way. And I use accurate methods, which means when I use those kind of data to predict, the difference between that and so-called real data is virtually non-existent in terms of the statistical reliability, because the real data isn't that real anyway. So when you're using these kinds of geographic modeling techniques, you're normalizing and you're getting rid of your outliers, and you're creating behavior for the smallest tight groups of people, and then you're using that behavior to really add a whole lot to any data that any organization has. It always makes me laugh when people get into this. Well, why would I use that postal code stuff when I've got, my database of, 200,000 or 2 million customers? Well, you would use it because you want to enhance what you know. You want to link things together. You want to be able to take action. If you've already got enough customers and you just want to market to your own database, then, that was kind of the CRM phase. But if you want to find the untapped potential of other people like them, and I hate the expression, but everybody talks about lookalikes. If you want to find other people like them, then understanding that whole universe of population in Canada or the US at that very small spatial scale is a hugely important factor of how people target. It takes advantage of 3 ideas. The first thing is that if a number of things happen together at the same place, there's a high probability that there's a relationship. Now, I can be lectured all day on the ecological fallacy, how that might not be true, but having been doing it for over 4 decades, I can tell you that the back testing that shows the prediction of consumer behavior based on geodemography, i.e. birds of a feather flock together, knowing a person's neighborhood tells me good things about it, has a tremendous amount of statistical reliability, and in almost every case, none less than using the actual pure data. And in this day and age, when privacy is really critical, being able to use aggregates and de-identified data, which, as I mentioned before, we've had to do in Canada since 1995, but you're now facing that much more as GDPR-like laws come across the US. Location intelligence and geodemography is having a revitalization as part of an important tool in the marketer's arsenal, because, it uses census data, so it can be used in any country. It's tied to the ground, not to the individual. I've mentioned that it's privacy friendly. You also create these nicknames and these sketches of segments, and we have our PRISM system for Canada, and Esri has its tapestry system, and there are other systems that are out there as well. But you give them a nickname and you draw a picture, and they immediately inside an organization bring groups of citizens or consumers to light. So when you're trying to advocate for the tools and the technology, you're usually trying to get, executives or people who aren't familiar with all of these statistical things. You're trying to get them on board to help them say, oh, I see what you're saying. Yes, I can relate to that kind of group. So these kind of segments always help the data speak and help executives or non-geographers or non-marketers understand that you're capturing something that's real here. They're designed for granularity. So, our system has just under 70 segments, and nobody is going to market to 70 different segments. But what they allow you to do is to combine information that a municipality has about its recreation users, or a customer, a manufacturer has about its customers. You put their data together with these kinds of segments, then you can create, as I showed in my GM example, you can create 7 groups that are customized based on their experience, but they're also linked to this standard system so that you can then go out to a media measurement or a behavior survey, and you can integrate disparate data sources that no group of organizations or consortia or not-for-profit is ever going to be able to bring together. They become a translator for different kinds of data, which really allows people to get an integrated view and actually reach a target and engage people better. And, they also have been very useful for us in harnessing new types of data that I'm going to talk about. But it all starts with making sure that we have really up-to-date small area demographics. So, you know, we do a census every 5 years, you do it every 10 years. It's lots of challenges. What people, you know, people can't rely right now in Canada. We had the first release 2 days ago of the 2021 census. We can't continue to rely for another 2 years until all those data are out on the 2016 census. So one of the things that we do, and it's really important to spatial analytics, is an up-to-date current year estimate for the population, right down to the smallest area possible. And how do we do that? We bring in a lot of data from a lot of people, but essentially we use a traditional kind of demographic model of growth that's kind of a cohort survival model, the best you can, taking headship rates in neighborhoods. So you can kind of get an idea of, you know, population growth at maybe the county or equivalent level. But then you also have to think about the economic cycle, which isn't nearly as predictable. So where the plants are going to open, where the subdivisions are going to be, where the growth's going to be. So you need to combine demographic models with econometric models. And then you need to actually look at the geographic distribution of neighborhoods and see where there's room to put that growth. And when you put all that together with starting from a census base and then bringing in all the other government and building permit and housing start data, then you can come up with a good annual estimate of what's really happening on the ground. And yeah, people will write to you and say, well, you got that subdivision on the wrong side of the intersection. And we'll say, yeah, but you know, we're still doing the best we can. And if you had to only rely on 10 or 5-year-old census data, you wouldn't be able to bring all these data together. So very important statistical modeling, all based on geographic techniques. These data then come together to build a commercial segmentation system. We've talked about it a little bit. You know, for us, Prism, we licensed the brand because it was a US product, and we decided to license it and work on a North American product. But this is built by us, owned by us, built from the ground up with Canadian data. And we let the data speak. We literally take, you know, census data and then our up-to-date estimates, plus a whole lot of other indicators that we get from all of the other kinds of data we have now. And we go through a process. We look at things like density, we look at proximity to shopping centers, we look at proximity to transportation routes, and we allow the data to actually define the segments. So we don't do anything in advance. We don't say we want to do an urban-rural split, or we want to look at rich-poor, we want to look at French versus English Canada. We just put all the data about the neighborhoods into a system. And I always tell the story that when we built the first system in 1979 for Canada, we got all the data, and the company that I was with then, we rented timeshare on a PDP-11 computer at U of T, and we ran it, and it took 4 weeks. And at the end, we said, okay, that's our system. Well, now with the computing power that we have and using a variety of techniques, we can run 100 solutions overnight, sometimes even more. And then we can use algorithms to see what are we really looking for when we build a segmentation system. We're looking for high highs and low lows. We're looking for the maximum homogeneity within a segment and the maximum difference between segments. And we're looking for segments that can measure media and that can measure consumer behavior and can measure psychographics and can measure, you know, affinity to government. So we're looking for a generic system that can go across the whole industry so that it can become the glue that holds different kinds of databases together. And the spatial modeling that goes into understanding what weight to put on different variables, and people poring over maps. So you have a combination of art and science, because if you build a really good segmentation system, then that's how you can link a whole lot of different disparate data sources together. So this is just an example of the level of detail that we can get when we actually build a Prism system at the postal code level. And we can also then take those data, because we know what kind of people live there in general. And if somebody's got a great survey of, you know, maybe 10,000 or 50,000, they got 50,000 sample survey, that would be a great survey, very expensive, don't get very many sample surveys of 50,000, maybe 20,000. And people rely on surveys all the time. But the surveys, as I said before, can tell you about Canada and the provinces and, you know, a few major markets. So now I want to take the observations from those 20,000 people and I want to project them onto 750,000 postal codes. So I know what people are interested in and whether they go to the opera or they watch, you know, hockey, and what kind of music and what kind of media and what their thought process is. So once you have a good segmentation system, then you can say the propensity of people in this prism segment to do this behavior is X, and there's this many households in that neighborhood, and therefore I can take the behavior that I'm getting from a survey using either a segmentation or actually using a more of a bootstrapping modeling technique, and I can project the survey data right down to the ground. Now, why is that so important? Because now I know what's happening in a trade area, but now I also can combine that through a link from a zip 4 or a postal code to my customer database. So now I'm all the things that all of the great surveys and the other aggregate data, like the car registration data and the credit bureau data that's anonymized. Now I can integrate that at the local level, and I can integrate it into my marketing database. We can even translate from geodemographics into mindset. You know, historically in our industry, people have used behavior as kind of a surrogate for mindset. But we have a database that asks in a variety of ways, real people's mental postures, how they feel about government, how they feel about, you know, ESG, social determinants of well-being. And we can use the survey data that we get to get the psychographics to link back to the ground, so that when I've defined a local campaign, I can actually reach that panacea, which is understand how do I need to communicate? That means, what pictures do I put in my ad? What message do I put in? If we're promoting wellness or we're promoting stay at home during a COVID lockdown, then what is it that I know about this group of people that I can define geographically that's going to have an impact on them, so that I can put the hot button in the message? And it's the kind of the integration of the survey data that enables us to do that. So that's kind of the traditional stuff, where we go from demographics to segments, and then we link it together with everything else, and we can really get a good picture of you know, both citizen and consumer behavior. And we do a lot of work for businesses, but we also do a lot of work for governments and NGOs to really help them understand the kinds of services that people are looking for. So the question keeps coming up then is, okay, well, that's all good, but now we got all this great other kind of data. We got what we call big data. And, you know, we even read the books after the McKinsey report 7 years ago that said, oh, well, we're not going to need any census data or survey data, anything anymore, because we're just going to gather all this data. We're going to take the breadcrumbs and everything from the Internet of Things and cellular devices, and we're going to know everything about everything. And it doesn't matter if it's not representative, because, you know, the argument about the signal and the noise. Well, that debate is still out there, but I can tell you from my experience that one of the most exciting things that's happening right now is we're using spatial analysis to harness the big data, because we know from looking at mobile movement data extensively across Canada and the US that whether you're getting it from apps or you're getting it from cell towers, it's not representative of the American or the Canadian population. It is what it is. It's this phone went there, it pinged at this point in time. Yes, I can buy it, but is it really big enough to say these are the people who are going to come back to restaurants versus people who are going to shop at the grocery store and cook at home? So what we've done in the last 5 years is invest a lot in how can we harness mobile movement data so that we can actually make it representative of the population. And again, we've used either the pings or the detection of the signal from the phone as an input source rather than the output source. And we've saying, can this phone, which we see in this shop, you know, every day, and maybe we see it 3 times a week, how do we measure the value of that mobile phone movement data for analytics compared to, having these huge fire hoses of data, but the phone might only be seen inside your McDonald's restaurant, once every 4 months. So understanding how the data are used and how they can be representative. Like some people just sell data by the pound and say, oh, we've got more phones than anyone else. Well, what's the quality of the apps that the phone's data are coming from? And how can you take that data and transform it into being representative of the population? So rather than selling raw big data, we use a lot of our geodemographic methods to weight and normalize. What that means is, can I understand if I know the prism segment or I know the demographics, can I understand how these mobile movement data that we're getting hourly and we're producing weekly, how can I weight them so that they represent within a small spatial constraint the kind of people who are likely to be living in that location or going to that store. So we've created those kinds of outputs so that it's called Mobilescapes. I'm not trying to do a commercial here, but it's a product where we've harnessed the big data and we've used more traditional demographics to weight and normalize it. And then we've put it inside systems so that our users can answer business questions, knowing that if you have a source of mobile movement data that's heavily related to gamers, or that's heavily related to the Weather Channel, or you don't know the mix, then how do you know if you're really showing something that's representative of the population? But one of the most exciting applications is taking some of these breadcrumb, exhaust, passively collected data and weighting them and normalizing them using more traditional data techniques. And then, we've also created geofences for 140,000 locations in Canada as accurately as possible using GIS techniques, so that when we're looking at where the phones go and weighting them back to the population, we can really understand at a small spatial scale if the phones are inside or outside. So our geodatabases are powered by ArcGIS. We deliver data through a platform that we've built on top of ArcGIS. So it's cloud-based, it's secure, it gives you access to a large number of our variables, and it's very intuitive. So it's not for the GIS user or the data scientist. It's for a person who wants to know, who are my customers? What are my best segments? Can you give me a dashboard so I can take it down the hall and prove to my media buyer, who these people are and what they're likely to buy? So they're using the power of the original data inputs and some of the new kinds of mobile movement data, we're starting to show these segments and personas and the audiences, but we're starting to show them weekly and monthly and quarterly instead of annually, by harnessing all this together and then putting it into a system that can be accessed by people who aren't trained professionals. Of course, we're making full advantage of ArcGIS Enterprise and JavaScript APIs and apps underneath the covers. And what we expose to the user is the functionality and the mapping powered by Esri, but they don't have to be a trained Esri user. And at the same time, we cooperate with Esri in Canada to put our data into their system so that they can work on that part of the market. Because as I've said at the beginning, we think data and analytics is a real partnership game. But we embed into our solution the highest level of expertise around geocoding and the definition of polygons and drive times and spatial apportionment. And when we talk about the smoothing and the algorithms that we're building now with the big data, it's all based on spatial analytics that have to be taught. And then we're building APIs so that other users can reach into our knowledge. And that means sometimes they just want to reach our data, but often they want to reach our data and the workflow and the reports that we have in Envision. So it's our goal to make our data and our way of processing the data accessible. So this is a bit of a logo chart, but this is, in Canada, we've taken all of our data and our spatial processing algorithms that are embedded in our platform, and we're allowing all these other media organizations to reach over into our platform, because I mean, most of them, to be honest with you, don't even understand what a GIS is. But since we've harnessed that GIS power, they can actually reach into our platform and get not only our data, but our workflows and bring it into their applications so that they don't have to replicate the work that we all do. And we do this for the car companies and the banks and consumer goods companies and education and energy and government and healthcare, insurance, not-for-profit, retail, real estate, sports and entertainment, travel and leisure, telecommunications, and media. And we have lots of customers in all that space for all those things. And then because everybody, you know, the strengths are you have data and you have software, but we also have industry experts who really sit with clients and say, what's the business problem you're trying to solve? So even though we have, you know, a purpose-built system, there's also many custom things that can be done. But you have to help the customer, whether they're a municipality or a manufacturer or a retailer, you have to help them understand. They have to tell you what they're going to do with the information at the other end so that all of the work and the analytics you do answers their questions. And that's what I wanted to talk to you about today.
Thank you, Jen, for a wonderful talk. Are you able to hear me okay? Okay. Let me see. I'm having a little. Okay, there we go.
I'm sorry. I guess I got muted while I was switching.
Not at all. Not at all. Well, that was fascinating. I think you covered a lot of good ground and a lot of nuance and rich insights that we all benefited from. We have a few questions that are trickling in from the chat. Whenever you're ready, I can relay a couple of them to you.
Fire
and we can see whether there are other questions that will come in as we are discussing. First question is from a UFR student, John Halcon. John happens to be at Walgreens, and he offers congratulations on your company's release of the first wave of the 2021 Canadian census data. John's question is, how difficult is it to measure something like affinity, whether it's to a sports team or whether it's to a retailer, especially if there has been some relocation that has happened in that organization's past?
So that's a great question. You know, we look, we do use our PRISM tool quite extensively for some of those problems, because we can look at the customer base. If the client has a record of customers and their names and addresses, or even just their postal codes, then we can say, you know, here's the groups that, you know, are your best performing customers. Then we can take that same view in looking at the psychographics or the behaviors. And then when you can look at the correlation between the kind of customers that you have and what rises to the top, you do a rank order correlation across, you know, 100 attitudes or 1,000 behaviors. Then you can say, these are the things that your customers are most motivated by. These are the things that they really like to buy. And then you can organize not only your offers and your services, but you can organize your messaging that really identify the things that resonate with your customer base. And you know, when we're seeing behavior change, like we're seeing hopefully post-pandemic, I don't know how we talk about a little different in Canada and the US, but and I don't want to get into that, but you know, if it's over, then are people going to go back to their old habits? Or are some of the things that we know that got accelerated during the pandemic, are they going to persist? So that's why we're really excited about being able to use our existing data as kind of this is the level set of the customers, but then using, you know, some of the new mobile data and web behavior data to say, you know, things are changing over time. We can look at what happened last week compared to the same week 2 years ago, or last week compared to the same week, the second week of the month a month ago. And so turning some of these geospatial analytics from understanding behaviors at a point in time and using them for trending makes it really possible to be agile.
This is the next question, if I may, kind of piggybacks on some of the things that you spoke about during your talk and also your response to the prior question. Jim this is a question from Jim actually. On one of your slides, I was very glad that you raised some of the methodological issues, for example, that plague spatial data, for example, problems associated with the ecological fallacy, spatial autocorrelation, so on and so forth. And Jim's question is, if a large sample survey is georeferenced to a large sized unit, such as provinces and so on and so forth, and if it is not keyed to a smaller geographic unit, for example, a postal or a zip code, how are we able to utilize that to better understand some of the features and the attributes of those who live or who are being studied at perhaps the zip code level?
So we use two techniques. We take a large sample size survey, and where it's possible, and it depends on whether it's a government or a private sector survey, we actually assign a PRISM code, which is a very precise set of multidimensional demographics to that survey. And then we say, well, basically if people who live in that postal code or zip +4 behave according to their type, which they most often do, then we can project the propensity to do that thing or consume that thing to be, X penetration of households. And then when you go right down to the local level and you know who lives there, you can make that assumption. Now, after you do that, then you roll it back up to whatever level of geography the survey data are reliable at, and you do some iterative processes and fitting. But you're basically using a typological projection down to the small area based on the survey. And that is, how good that is really dependent on two things: how good the survey is and how good your segmentation system is. Now, we also know that even though we think in general every member of a PRISM segment has pretty similar behavior across Canada, we know there's some anomalies. So if you're looking at who sells snowblowers, and we project the sales of snowblowers into Vancouver where it doesn't snow, then we're going to really be guilty of the ecological fallacy. So we've developed some additional techniques where you actually use a geographic constraint around what the opportunity was to make that purchase, and then you can eliminate some of those problems. And then the final thing is that more and more we can take the actual demographics from the survey and do kind of create sort of synthetic population. So we know that people who have this characteristic and this characteristic often have that characteristic. So you can almost like bootstrapping in the old survey methodology, you can pull different records out of the survey and then actually create that multi-dimensional demographic and then match it to the ground. So like new research is being done and new techniques, but we always test after we do that projection, we always test back to when we roll that back up, does it stay true to the original survey data?
Excellent. So again, this next question, Jan, sort of flows from some of the discussions that you've already had with us, and it comes from Bart Minharis, who is an MBA student in the School of Business and Society with a concentration in location analytics. Bart's question has to do with data quality. And given that a lot of the work that is being done in the analytics space is dependent on data, right? And so quality is extremely crucial. Can you tell us a little bit more about what is your take? How is your company handling when you're bringing in data from 6, 7 dozen different sources and trying to mesh it all together and trying to deploy predictive algorithms and so on and so forth? What is the data quality discourse like, and how are some of the data quality issues being handled?
Yeah. Well, there's nothing more important than the quality of the data, because what we're really trying to, and if you get it wrong, doesn't work, and have survived through our leadership for 40 years. People actually go and they spend money and they do it and they test it. And so the key thing for us is we have a customer advisory board, and we have an annual conference every year with 1,000 researchers, and people tell us, and it's so valuable to know. That's number one. Number two, we have a super strong group of methodologists. Our company, one of the founders, Dr. Tody Lee, was one of the world-renowned experts in spatial allocation models and taught many different places in Canada and the US. And he's trained a whole team of researchers to put methodology and quality first. The third thing is methodology has to be number one, and you have to have quality control after the fact. But one of my pet peeves is that there's a lot of people in the data and analytics space who tell you, well, we say, how did you do that? Well, we have algorithms. Okay, thanks. Explain it to me. They can't explain it to you. And you have a lot of technology firms, and I'm not an anti-IT person, but technologists can't be in charge of how data get developed. The fundamentals of research and principles and modeling, whether you're in AI or machine learning or typological projection, the theoretical underpinnings have to be there. So we have the former head of the Census of Canada, 3 methodologists who were trained by Tony, who was a pioneer. We work very closely with Esri. We run educational committee with all of the major universities in Canada, because there's nothing more important than exploring new methods. That's why I dwelt on the issue of big data, because so many people were saying, well, we'll just take all the big data and that will, because the sample's so big, that'll represent reality. But we've proven that it doesn't. We've proven that you need a combination of official statistics, high quality statistics, and big data to make big data actionable. So if your data quality isn't right to begin with, it doesn't matter how fancy your map is.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, terrific. I want to turn towards an important topic that you touched on a number of times during your talk itself, which is, Canada has had data privacy related laws, perhaps, and issues that have had to be dealt with since 1995, more recently GDPR and the sport of laws here stateside. Talk to us a little bit about, business ethicists, for example, or ethicists in general have been doing a lot of work in trying to understand some of the ethical implications that tie in with geodemographics or with psychographic segmentation, and have been expressing concerns that some of these methods may lead to sometimes unintended consequences, such as shutting out people and places from participation. Perhaps those who are already at the periphery are all further and further getting removed from true what is meaningful participation. How are you as a CEO, as a leader of a company, thinking about these things? How are you encouraging your colleagues to think about these things? And perhaps, if I may, when you're working with your clients, what is being done perhaps in the analytics process to help perhaps think through these issues, reconcile these issues in terms of actual decision making?
Well, let me separate the answer into two parts, and I'll try to relate them back if we have time. The first question around privacy. First of all, our societies need to be data driven in order to really look after people, from a social point of view, in order to make sure people's lives are easy and convenient, and essentially for our economies to be competitive and prosper. We have to take advantage of innovation, but we also have to be data driven. So we have to have the ability to use data, and the kinds of data that we've used in the past based on government surveys and other kinds of surveys. The reality is they're drying up because people don't want to fill that stuff out anymore so much. There's lots of challenges for the Census Bureau and for Statistics Canada and for all of the big survey companies. There's response So we need to use big data, and we need to use data that are collected from breadcrumbs. So what is imperative? Number one, the transparency and consent framework that are being developed all over the world, in Europe, in the United States, and in Canada, that say you have to disclose to the average citizen what you're going to do with data that they might give to a government or a brand that they trust. So you have to say, here's what we do with your data, and here's how we use it, even if it's de-identified. So there's the first kind of data, which is de-identified and anonymized, that goes into a statistical process. You have to be transparent about that. Secondly, if you're going to use data to actually send people offers or advertising, you have to have their consent. And the third thing is, when you're using de-identified data and using statistical models, people have to be assured that they can't be re-identified. And there's a whole body of research on how to do that. But we participate in that, and we work very closely with those kind of privacy and synthetic data firms that help that are methods. We go through audits, we go through tests, and we deal with the privacy thing that way. On the subject of special populations, which is, we really do need to understand Indigenous people. We need to understand Black Canadians and Americans. We need to understand people of color. We need to understand people of low socioeconomic status. So here we have the Great Divide. In America, when I sell my PRISM segmentation system, I have 6 segments that make up almost to 10% of the population that are very distinctly, their behaviors and their attitudes are very much influenced from the fact that they're immigrants from Asia and South Asia. And in our system, we say that, and that's legal in Canada. In the US, you're not allowed to identify segments based on their country of origin. And I understand why, but the way we approach it is that we consult with those communities, and we say nothing about us without us. So we must have those data in order. You can't make social progress around anti-Black racism and the rights of Indigenous people if you don't have something to measure. So you have to measure in a way that is acceptable to the communities. And then as data people, all of us, researchers, users, business people of just good conscience, have to understand that what the strengths and weaknesses of using those data are. And they are policed and managed in some regulations, but the same as we're dealing with the issues of social justice, we have to deal with that in the data world. And so I always ask people in the data world to be conscious. We need the data. If you say, well, we're not going to measure any of that because it might be used to discriminate, then it's going to be very hard to monitor progress. So we have in our company a group called our JEDI Council, which JEDI stands for Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. And it's a volunteer group of 50 people who makes recommendations to management all the time about how we name our segments, what data we're collecting, and how we consult with our customers. And we focus on it from a Canadian point of view, but that's what has to happen. We have to be, you can't change what you don't measure. And so we can't just say, oh, well, we're just the geeks over here building the models. Somebody else will worry about the politics. No, as good corporate citizens, we have to be sure that the ethics and the consultation are embedded in our process. So I don't have the magic answer. I just know that I have to keep that top of mind in all the work we do.
Superb. Okay. Jan, I do have one final question, and this is a fascinating question. I know Jim popping up, so that's my indicator to wrap up, but I would, Jim, if it's okay, like to ask Jan this question. Jan, we have so many students in the audience today, a number of undergraduates, graduate students, and who are aspiring business professionals already, who are about to be analysts and data scientists, and about to embark into the world of analytics, if they haven't already. This is a lot of good information. What would you tell? Let me maybe separate this an undergrad or a grad, or just generally overall. What would you tell them as they consider further studies in spatial analytics, in location analytics, and GIS overall? This is a question that comes from a dear colleague, Professor Scott Randolph in business administration. And what are some of the enduring skills for those that are graduating, let's say, from master's programs that perhaps you as CEO of a company would be looking for, right? In terms of these aspiring analysts and data scientists and so on and so forth.
Well, there's a lot of things, I'd love to have people who can bridge the gap between being the very geeky data analyst and data scientist and the person who understands the business problems we're trying to solve. But I find they don't often come in the same package. So what I look for is at least people who can try to listen and put themselves in the other person's shoes. Because the data scientist job for me is to say what they always say, used to drive me crazy, but what they say is the problem is, and what the sales and business marketing person says, oh, I need that. So, bringing those two worlds together. So that's why in all our work with universities and the work you're doing, it's so important to get the critical skills across the disciplines and take advantage of the different kinds of mindsets that people have. It's not that the business people are, they're smarter and more creative and the geeky people are super technical. It's that you need both of those things, but you need at least to have that respect across those two things. Second thing you need to do is understand that when you're using data analytics in a business, whether you're working for business or a government, it's your job to make sure that you take stakeholders through the exercise of understanding what the problem is they're trying to solve. So people call, they say, oh, I got to do a segmentation system. Well, what are you going to do with it? Well, they don't know. So you build a segmentation system that's going to meet the needs of this one silo over here. It's going to tell me, where to put my stores. And then the next week, somebody's going to use it for a branding message, but we didn't build that into the way we built it. So communication, upfront diagnostic, and a data strategy has to have corporate buy-in. I can't tell you how disheartening it is. I'm generally an optimistic person, but there's so many large organizations in Canada and the US that we deal with who can talk all you like about data science and AI and machine learning and hiring this and investing that, and they still don't have their, database integrated. They don't have one view of the customer. The silos across organizations are terrible. And so if you really want to be successful, you have to be an advocate for integrated databases. You have to be an advocate for a data-driven strategy. And what we have to do, all the people on this call, is make sure that the location and the time of the event are embedded in the database, not just in the GIS department, but in the corporate database. So we got the left hand and the left and the right side of the brain working together. We've got an integrated view of the customer, and we're inserting geography into what we do.
I think that's a profoundly insightful way to sort of bring this to a closure. Lots more to discuss. I took away a number of important things, but one of the last things that you said, those two things don't usually come in a package, and that continues to be a motivation for all of us here. Thank you very, very much for your talk, for patiently answering all our questions. Let me turn the floor back to Jim now. Thank you, Jan.
Thank you, Jan, for an amazing talk. And the Q&A, you continue to enlighten us, answer after answer. Just fabulous presentation. It has contributed greatly to our knowledge of location analytics in the real world and how customers can benefit by it. All the methodologies you pointed out, but at the end of the day, it's the customer and their benefit that really counts. Thank you for making that point and many other points. We appreciate your making your slides and your talk video available to be posted on the center's website. We are sending a token of our appreciation to you in Canada, in Toronto. So that may take a few days to get there, but we're very pleased to do that. I wanted to remind people who are here that we do have an upcoming talk on March 23rd by Mike Pasqualetti, Professor of Geography at ASU. Again, that will be from 6 to 7:15 p.m. Pacific time. His topic is the morality of wind energy landscapes. And you can find that flyer by next week. You'll find it on the center's website. I would like to extend special thanks to Bert Minhares, graduate assistant of the center, and to Kian Nahavandi of the school's Spatial Business Initiative. Also thanks to Julia Easley in the School of Business Dean's office, and to the campus media team of Olivia Rogers, Luis Garcia, and others. Thanks to my colleague, Dr. Avijit Sarkar, for moderating the Q&A and helping in many ways to plan the event. And Jan, again, thank you so much for a wonderful talk.
Jim, just let me say thank you for having me. It's a great honor to be associated with this school, and I hope we can continue the dialogue. It's just, it's been an unbelievable opportunity for me to reconnect, and I thank you so much for having me. So please stay in touch.
Well, thank you so much. So appreciate that. And also thanks to our participants, our attendees for being here this evening, and we hope to see you again at future events of the center.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.